Marvel Comics is like so lame. Image is where it's at, man. If only there was a Marvel hero who appealed to my sensibilities. Wait a minute, what's that? Whoa! It's like some sort of stick. Hit me, dude. Well, I mean, okay. Whoa! What's this? Whoa! Thunderstrike! Awesome! You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd say this was a book from Image Comics. Extreme!
Hey everyone, Ethan Ainsworth here. I hope you can see okay. I'm kind of filming this in a really weird angle. I've got the tripod like up this way and reverse perspective, and I'm going to flip it in post. But I wanted to talk about Thunderstrike #1. This is a series that I'm kind of an unofficial series up until this point that I'm doing called Extreme 90's, I think I'm going to call it. And the first unofficial episode was the Bloodshot review, and a lot of fun with that, just of how absurdly gimmicky and cliche it was for the time, and just how awful it was. So I'm going to give you another example of a really 90's tacular extreme book, and this is in the form of Thunderstrike. Now, Thunderstrike is sort of a spin-off of Thor, as you can tell. He's not Thor, although he did possess the power of Thor for a short time. Thunderstrike is a different character entirely, and if you've read Infinity Gauntlet, he is Thor in that story. But this is after that. So Thor has basically left to go back to Asgard to marry Sif, the warrior Sif, and he's left Thunderstrike as his sort of heir, if you will, and he's granted him this mace, which I think is probably the coolest looking thing about Thunderstrike. And it's similar to Mjolnir, but it's not as powerful. And I think it says something like "The world still needs heroes, Thunderstrike," and that's the name of his hammer, of his mace, if you will. But this is so like stupid extreme 90's Thor. Thor went through the gauntlet in the 90's. He was being ravaged on a constant basis. There was that weird like midriff armor head sock Thor from the 90's. There was the World Engine style Thor. There was Thunderstrike Thor, and there was the Thunderstrike as Thor. So there was a multitude of Thors, and they all looked stupid. Now, getting into the issue, it's all over the place. It's very 90's in the art. The art is actually probably one of the best things about this book. I will say that there's a lot of like weird 90's tropes in the art, in the way that it's all tremendously cross-hatched in completely unnecessary spots. Like everything is cross-hatching. The shadows here are cross-hatching. The ground is cross-hatched here. There's just cross-hatching all over the place, which is a big like 90's thing. Todd McFarlane did a lot of cross-hatching detailing. You can see we've even got the holographic cover, the first explosive issue, and this was $3 back in like 1993. That's a lot of money to charge for a comic book in 93. To be fair, I think this book is something like 45 pages. Yeah, 46 pages is this book. And so I suppose that's a decent page per cent ratio. The only thing is, most kids who would be interested in this could not afford this back in the 90's. Like, I remember when I was a kid, comic books were $2.99, and I couldn't afford more than like 2 books a week tops, because kids don't have money. And so if you're reading like 15,000 X-Men titles and you're reading Spawn and Youngblood and all that garbage, not that Spawn is garbage, I actually kind of like Spawn, but it's like, you have no excuse. Image actually did this really cool thing later on, where with their first trade paperback, a standard trade paperback's usually between $17 and $21, at least Canadian, and they did this really cool thing where they made all of their first volumes $9.99, and so you got $10. It was like half as much as every other volume on the shelf from every other company, and it was basically like, this is your enticement. This is what's going to get you into the series. It's cheap. It's affordable. You're not taking any risks. Is basically the idea. And from there they hook you, and then the rest of the volumes are $15 or what have you. Still fairly inexpensive. But this is like the inverse of that. They did this thing in the 90s, Marvel and Image in particular, where they tried to get as much money. They tried to ring you for as much money as they could possibly get out of you by making every cover like this board stock and holographic or shiny in some way, like a fucking Pokemon card. And yeah, just ridiculous. I think this book is not inherently terrible, but I think it would have benefited from being 22 pages rather than 46, because there's just not 46 pages worth of story here. So we open up with a sort of carjacking. These guys are mugging the woman, and I have no idea what city this is. Actually, I think they do say later on it is Manhattan, but there's no indication of geography at any point. I sort of assumed it was California just from like the basic look at it. I sort of assumed it was Los Angeles because it doesn't look like anything distinct, and it's kind of sparse in terms of high rise. So I thought it was Los Angeles or something, but I think they do mention later on that they're in Manhattan. It's just like completely unrecognizable Manhattan. Now this is a trope from the 90s that happened a lot. I'll have to lay it out this way because it wouldn't fit in the view. But this is this is kind of cool. I hate this sort of page layout where you have to turn the book and hold it in a really weird way if you're trying to read it. And look at all this, like, it's not even real cross-hatching. It's lazy cross-hatching. It's just grid patterns. What are you trying to... Is that what shadow looks like? At least with real cross-hatching, it sort of looks random. But this is so uniform that it's off-putting. But I think the coloring is actually pretty damn good. And I do like the sort of costume design here. The lighting's a little weird on this hand. He's not wearing a glove, but it looks like he's wearing one of those those like gardening or dishwashing gloves. And of course it's got to have blood in the title, Blood Without Glory. It's always blood in the 90s. It's written by Tom DeFalco, and I do love Tom DeFalco. Pencils by Ron Frenz. So the art is competent. It's just all this sort of weird tropey nonsense going on. And I think the direction behind that was Marvel was basically saying, you need to make this look like those books over there at Image that are selling really well. But yeah, so I do like this costume. It does not last the whole issue. He gets a new costume by the end. And I think this is ridiculous. I think this is like a pretty good version of like a modern Thor. It's all the classic elements of Thor, the discs, the colors, the boots, and the helmet and all that stuff, but it's a little bit more modern. But I don't think Thor is one of those characters that needs to look modern. I think Thor works on its own because he is like this mythical being. He's not really meant to be grounded in the real world in that way. But yeah, this if you're reading this in like an omnibus or a large trade, this is abhorrent to try to read. I was reading the Clone Saga omnibuses a while back because I own those, and it's just constantly you have to turn the entire omnibus. Now these omnibuses are huge; they're like 47 issues a piece, and so when you turn them, they're impossible to hold, and you certainly can't take them with you and expect to be able to like flip them around and stuff like that. It's a precarious situation. But basically, there's this plot where somehow this like gang of carjackers is terrorizing the city. Now, this is not a problem for Eric Masterson, right? Like, this should not be an issue for this should not be an issue for somebody with the powers of Thor. Carjackers are a little below his pay grade, right? But also, the situation is such that, like, these, like, 4 or 5, like, chuckle fucks are terrorizing the city. Like, there's this big thing where everybody in the city is horrified of these carjackers for some reason, like this little shitty gang of ne'er-do-wells who are going about and stealing people's cars. And I just can't help but think that the people of the Marvel Universe have more important things to worry about. I mean, there are aliens and giants and other dimensions and shit encroaching upon their daily lives in a pretty regular fashion. So I can't help but feel that carjackers are a little bit, low stakes, and they treat it like it's a really big deal. The art over here, by the way, like, look at this, just this square cross-hatching. It looks so ridiculous. But right here, Thor's like, what is this flight posture? This is awful. I love Ron Frenz. I think he's done some great work on Spider-Man. But what is this? Tell me what this is. It looks absurd. Like, the angle, he's supposed to be going up, but it looks like he's like this. Even the speed lines make him look like he's coming from this direction, but he's also in such a weird, like, strange posture that he looks like a fucking idiot. I mean, like, it's absurd. I mean, the continuity with the position of everybody isn't even consistent. Anyway, so he basically gives a spiel about his backstory and where he comes from and what his responsibilities are and all this stuff. And the art's pretty damn good in that part. And we learn a little bit about Eric Masterson's personal life. You know, he has this wife. He's sort of homeless right now because he's busy being Thor. He doesn't really have time for a job or anything like that. And he's recently divorced. I believe he has a child as well, but his ex-wife, is this sort of Jane Fonda type personality, and she's married to this new guy, or at least she's dating this new guy, and he's got like a secret he's got a sweet mullet, because everybody in the 90s has a fucking mullet. Spider-Man had a mullet, other Spider-Man had a mullet, Superman had a mullet. Everybody had a mullet. So now this guy has a mullet. I think Tony Stark even had a mullet in the 90s. But I thought he might have been Tony Stark for a brief instant. He even has a sidekick who looks a bit like James Rhodes did in the 90s. James Rhodes, that is. But yeah, so he has a secret. Oh, what's it gonna be? And we got to this ridiculous scene. By the way, why are purple pants so popular in the Marvel Universe? I read a Web of Spider-Man book yesterday that had Peter Parker wearing purple pants, just very casually as well. Like, what is it with purple pants? I get that it's supposed to be contrast, but it's like, it's weird. Green pants and purple pants in the Marvel Universe. Anyway, so this stupid villain with like a shit Doctor Doom mask is like one of the leaders of this carjacking gang. And he just looks absurd. He looks like the most 90s tacular street urchin you could possibly imagine. Where am I here? Yeah. Just ridiculous. He's got like a Pirates of the Caribbean belt. He's got these purple pants. He's got this huge rad 90s trench coat with like too much shit going on. And these big like leg gauntlet boots, gloves, and this wild hair that pops out of the panels, which is so stupid. I think if you're going to pop out of the panels, it should be with a reason. Like, there should be some sort of purpose for it. But things are popping out of the panels all over the goddamn place in this, and it's more distracting than it is cool. Like, here it's just sort of his feet are popping out of the panel, and it's encroaching on this shot here, so you're supposed to get a dramatic close-up of his eyes. And it just ends up, if I could move it over here, you're trying to get this close-up of his eyes, and it just ends up being really awkward because you're distracted by these feet dangling down into the view. It would make some sense if you just had this guy coming out of the panel, to show like the power, the force that this guy's wielding. But it's just all over the place. His hair's popping out of the panel just with no reason. This woman over here, her hair is popping out of the panels for no good reason. It's just all over the place. It's so spectacularly 90s. But basically, Eric Masterson goes to see his son, and basically his son tells him that his ex-wife's new husband has had the crap beaten out of him by these thugs. And is it him? Anyway, we're introduced to this villain called Blood Axe because everybody has to have blood in their name, I guess. Otherwise, like, you don't exist in the 90s. If you're not the Punisher, Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, or a mutant, or you have the name Blood in your, or you have the word blood in your name, you don't exist. So we get this guy who's like apparently fought Thor to a standstill before, which is like, what? This douchebag? That kind of just it kind of discredits Thor a bit. It kind of makes Thor sad. But this like skull wielding, axe carrying douchebag he's got like arm fall off boy shoulder, and the stupid axe that's like chained around him, like I guess in case he drops it, he can get back to it quickly. But the thing is, he'll drop it later, and Eric Masterson will steal it from him, and the chain doesn't come into effect. So I think the chain just sort of disappears partway through the issue. But in theory, it's like wrapped around him on a chain, and he's got these weird, stupid fucking boot things, like these spikes, and he's popping out of the panel because he's so badass. But it's like, just make this should be one this purple space doesn't serve any purpose. It's just a void panel. So just extend his panel into the rest of the page. Like, I don't know what purpose this purple space is trying to serve here. It doesn't have any sort of reason to exist. It doesn't even have a proper border. It is just void space. So it should either be white, like the rest of the page, or this panel should expand over into the rest of the purple. I mean, I'm not like, I'm not an artist or whatever, but it just seems to me that it doesn't serve any purpose. I love these old 90s ads, by the way. Where you get your stand soapbox. Those were fun. And they've actually recently started reprinting those the last year or two. And I think it's really cute. I think they're really, they're great. Now, this is actually probably the coolest panel in the book. There are these prisoners here, and Blood Axe approaches them. They're part of the carjacking gang. And Blood Axe is after this carjacking gang for some reason or the other. He's basically like a vigilante, like the Punisher, only he possesses powers allegedly comparable to that of Thor. So, yeah, whatever. Anyway, so he goes to seek vengeance on these members of the hijacking car gang, even though they've already been detained. And he just blasts through him, which is pretty cool. But like, it's just the image that's cool. There's nothing cool about it. And this speed line here, where the city's just sort of in a void of speed line, it doesn't really make any sense either. If you had the vague shape of buildings and they went into sort of a speed blur, that would make sense. But this just looks sort of weird. It just sort of puts him in this weird ether of buildings and nonsense. But, you know, whatever. So we meet these JR style cops, and actually this is weird because it makes it look, this Velcro piece makes it look like there's more to the word, but there's not. But so that some shit has gone down, and Blood Axe is loose, and so Thunderstrike goes and Thunderstrike goes and talks to the police, and basically they tell him that they don't know where he is, but he came here, and basically they explain that he's fought Thor before, and that he's a big danger, and all that nonsense, and how badass he is, basically. And the perspective on this is really weird as well. Like, this doesn't quite work. This looks two-dimensional, whereas this looks three-dimensional. There's no perspective on that. It just sort of fades into the black. So Blood Axe comes after the rest of the hijack gang at their base, and he's popping out of the panels because fucking course he is. Because nobody could just be in a panel grid anymore. They've got to be all over the place. And we flip the book. Whoa! And we get this other like. I can't even flip it the proper way because we get this other situation where you have to turn the page, you have to turn the book like you're reading a fucking porno mag on the bus, and Thunderstrike smacks into him, and of course they pop out of the panel. They can't just have space filled with speed lines or anything like that. It just has to be, this is the panel, and they gotta pop out of it because they're so badass and cool. So they fight for a bit, and the art is generally pretty badass. And by the way, here you can see that the chain is still attached after he's struck, but this is, I've actually just pinpointed the part where the chain disappears on the axe. It's just sort of stops existing at this point, but we can see that it wasn't broken or anything, and it's also changed color, and it sort of stops existing. Oh, and now it's back again. So it's just kind of bad continuity all around. But basically there's a fight, and it's pretty well illustrated, but there's some weird cross-hatching going on, and Thunderstrike is sort of bashed into the wall, and the fight is not terrible. It looks pretty decent. Thunderstrike gets pretty messed up, which is cool, but there's just this unnecessary nonsense all over the place. Like, this is the most egregious example of it. Like, what Shadow? This is not Shadow. Shadow does not exist. What is this? What looks like that? There's some here as well, which actually does make sense in this context over here. But here it's like, what is this? Just draw darker areas of the hair or something. The shadows, so there's like 4 different light sources casting shadows in this page, and it's a full page spread, and it doesn't really serve any purpose as a full page spread. It's sort of, the image should probably also just be sort of cut off here, because the rest of the head looks really odd. Whatever. I mean, like, shit, man. We get 2 pages of ads. Bart's Nightmare for the Sega Genesis. And an ad for a DC comic book, funny enough. Or DC trading cards. And of course, because it's extreme 90s, it's got to be bloodlines. Now this is during the Reign of Superman era. So you've got Eradicator, Steel, Superboy, and Cyborg Superman, Hank Henshaw. And so Thor goes to this costume shop, basically. He goes to this tailor, and there's this weird cross-hatching, like, around the light, which doesn't make any sense. Or I guess this is a bell, but it's still weird and doesn't make sense. Like, this is the light up here, so why is there cross-hatching on the ceiling all around the light? At least, like, shouldn't there be a sort of aura of different light? Anyway, so he walks in, and he's like, hey, I need a new costume. And so basically she gives him the stupid fucking trench coat, vest, whatever the hell from the cover, and boots. But it's like, it leads to question, does the hammer not give him his costume, the mace rather? Because I'm pretty sure you pick up the enchanted object and your costume appears on you, kind of like a Green Lantern. So is there an option to just not do that? Can you just choose your own like, what? Anyway, also he has no money, so I don't know how he's affording these sorts of expenditures. And anyway, so he's on a date with this girl, and she's really into him because he's so rad and cool. But then he watches the news, or he gets a phone call. Yeah, he gets a phone call that Blood Axe is like back again, and so the chain that was attached to his Blood Axe is now detached from his Blood Axe, and it's just around his body, so that Thunderstrike can take it from him later. This panel is really weird as well. There's not a lot of clear storytelling going on here. It's sort of unclear what's happening. I mean, I can tell what's happening looking at it, but closely, but it's really odd. It doesn't make a lot of sense because he's just sort of standing there like this, basically, with no real purpose. And also the leather on the hammer, or on the mace, is now a chain, even though it's like it's part of an enchanted weapon. So I don't know that you could just sort of change that out at your leisure. But now it's a chain because chains are cool, yeah. And no one dies tonight if I can help it. And he sort of jumps in out of panel into void space. But it's like, so he's jumping this way, and the mace is coming this way, and it's sort of unclear what's going on. It's also a weird angle. So he throws it at him, and then he presumably jumps in the direction of him. But then he's definitely jumping in the direction of him, because he hits him like straight on. So he throws the hammer straight on, and it hits him in the back, and he turns around, and so he jumps at him, and then the hammer somehow comes from over here to connect with him going this way. So there's now two-dimensional motion, or 2 dimensions of motion, I should say. There's this way, and then there's this way. And so they fight for a bit, and they like wax philosophical viewpoints on criminality and that sort of thing, and yell at each other for a bit. And then you get this like other style of shading here, where it's just the lines, and then right next to him you get a different style of shading for the same panel. Oh, also a bunch of the criminals get shot up, so it was all for naught. But also this is like shooting shit out of it too, I guess, and then it's popping out of the panel because of course it is. But one really cool thing that happens is Thunderstrike sort of like catches the axe with his mace and takes it from him like this in a double page splash. The perspective on this is really weird, by the way. And you've got 2 full pages, and you've got Thunderstrike popping out by just a tiny insignificant margin on this side. But Blood Axe is not popping out at all. But the axe is popping out all the way. So it's like this weird shit going on. And the textures on everything are rendered completely differently than they were before. Also, all the boxes look completely 2-dimensional. And it's just really weird. And this is weird too. I think this was a an inker mistake or something. But yeah. So Thor like bashes him through a bunch of, Thunderstrike bashes him through a bunch of stuff, and then Blood Axe picks up a car because he's so cool, and then Thunderstrike realizes he can like blast vague energy out of his mace, and the whole thing crashes on them, and the medics come and stuff. And he sort of stands there triumphantly, like he's such a badass, even though he came there to save the gang members, and they all died. So there is no victory. They try to make it like this really cool moment where it's like, he gave Thor a run for his money, and I managed to take him out because I'm so rad and cool. Yeah, bro. But the problem is, you did not do what you were supposed to do. You did not win. And then we get the weird cross-hatching again, but You did not complete the task you came here to complete. You sort of beat the shit out of him for a bit, but you failed in that the people you were trying to protect all died. They were all killed. He killed them. You did not save them. It even calls the name Thunderstike dum dum dum. But it's like, it's written on a mace, isn't it? I don't think you really get a choice in the matter. But yeah, so that's the issue, and I think next issue he's supposed to be fighting Juggernaut, because he's just gonna go through all the strong guys and show how badass he is. Also, is he just keeping this axe now? Is it because he seems to have it in the preview for next issue? So I guess he's just decided it's his now. He's decided he owns it. Anyway, I'll that was oh, I love these, by the way. I don't know, they're just so nostalgic. They're not great ads or anything, but they're just so nostalgic for me. Even though I didn't grow up in the 90s, I when I was young, I had books from the 90s, obviously, because they were readily available. So I remember all these ads really well and fondly. Even though they're jarring in the definition on different layers is completely different. You can see the halo or the splicing and the image editing in certain places, and the images on the cards are just terrible. But yeah, anyway. Thank you for tuning in. This is really weird too. It's got like a background down here. It's a bit jarring. Anyway, I will catch you guys later. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to see more Extreme 90s videos, I've got a ton of them in my head that are just ready to go. I thought it was fun, just sort of picking this book apart, having a laugh at it. And anyway, I'll catch you guys later.